Well, good morning, everybody. So I wonder, have you ever given someone some advice and they ignore it, and then you ended up being right? The thing that you told them to would happen did happen. Have you ever had that happen? Okay. When this occurs, there's this short little phrase that we are really tempted to say to them afterwards, and it's, I told you so. I told you so. Use with caution, okay? And we have kids in the room, so I need the kids to look at me. Do not try this at home, okay? Do not tell your parents, hey, I learned this phrase, told you so, at church. Not going to go over well for you or for me, for that matter. So probably something you should say very sparingly, but I want to tell you about the last time that I said that phrase, which if I was really mature would have been like a long time ago. So 3 weeks ago, my wife and I, so the school we graduated from has an annual alumni game and a basketball game. So every year, all of us old people get together and pretend like we can still play basketball. And so as we were approaching it, we were talking about it, and she mentioned that she was wanting to play. And I didn't straight up say, you cannot do this, but I did kind of hint. I dropped a few hints like, are you sure this is the smartest thing for you to do? Because, you know, like the stakes are pretty high here. You're kind of the MVP of our household. And if you go down, like we're going to be hurting. And even though the Mavs are as terrible as they are, the likelihood that you get a contract out of this deal, very, very small. So I don't know if you should do it. So anyway, she, ends up doing it. And I said, listen, you can play, but one rule, do not get hurt. Well, she gets hurt. So she's playing, someone basically curb stomps her foot, a ligament in her foot pops, and oh yeah, you feel that. So she's been, if you see her around and she's on crutches, that's why. And so, because I'm a wise man, I didn't say, I told you so, for the first 24 hours. I waited for the initial pain to subside before I said, told you so. See, there's this principle in Scripture called the principle of sowing and reaping, which, though I'm not going to speak about it, it does set up this next story quite nicely. So this week, after me giving my wife a hard time about this week, I run an errand for the church, and I have to go pick up some boxes of stuff for XO, or marriage conference that we did this past weekend. So I go into the store, say, hey, I'm from the church. I'm here to pick up some boxes. And this lady hands them to me. And of course, I have to take them all in one trip, because you just do. And so I'm carrying the boxes, and the lady, walks out with me, and she said, here, let me help you get your car door for you. And I said, here I am. I came to get what I needed. I needed the boxes from you, got what I needed. And here this sweet lady is offering me her assistance. And what do I say? I say, nah, I'm good. I'm good. So I'm carrying the boxes while I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to open the car door while holding these boxes? Because obviously putting them down is not an option. So I'm thinking, how am I going to open the door? That's what I'm thinking about. What I should have been thinking about is the giant drop off from the sidewalk to the concrete, the curb. Thank you. Goodness. But it wasn't just the curb. See, there was a drop off, because this is why I was having a little blank moment there. There was a drop off from the sidewalk to the curb, and then there's the drop off from the curb to the pavement. Okay. Double drop is what we were experiencing here. That's what I should have been thinking about, but I wasn't, because I told the lady I'm good. So I'm carrying these boxes, totally forget about this cliff, and I just, boom, I wipe out. I go down, both knees on the pavement, and after I pick up my dignity from the parking lot, this lady who offered me her help is sitting there watching the whole thing. And she didn't say it, but I know what she was thinking. I told you so. And I think we do this with Jesus a lot. We show up to church and we're like, all right, Jesus, I'm here to get what I came for. I want to come in, get my worship fix, get the encouraging word, all of that. We want God's blessing and his presence and his provision in our life. But when God goes to hand us his people, we're like, nah, I'm good. Because we're really aware of our need for God. God, I know I need you, but I'm not so sure I need them. I'm good on my own. But here's the thing. God never intended for us to walk through this Christian journey alone. His plan has always been to form a family of people. And whether you know it or not, from the moment you were born, this is what you've been searching for as well. From the very beginning, God's intention his desire was to create a family. And in the creation story, you see a God who is mysteriously in community, Father, Son, and Spirit. You see a God who is in community, creating human beings, male and female. And then you see Jesus, who is bringing in this new creation. And this new creation that he's bringing is also set in the context of community. In Romans chapter 8, verse 29, it says this, "For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to be like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters." God is not interested in calling a bunch of isolated followers. What God is interested in is forming a family. And from the moment we're born, our brains are wired to search for and ask this question of, who are my people? You see this with babies trying to figure out the world around them. Who are my people? And our life is so much, it's not just something that we do when we're younger. Our entire life is so shaped and formed by our pursuit of answering that question. Who are my people? As Jim Wilder said, he said, the brain functions that determine our character are most profoundly shaped by who we love. In the human brain, identity and character are formed by who we love. Who we are, the person we're becoming, is incredibly influenced by the people we're around and the people that we love. Pastor Antoinette last week, she talked about how formation isn't optional. We are all being formed into something. So the question isn't whether or not you're being formed. The question is, who or what is forming you? We've all been shaped. We've been shaped by our nationality. We've been shaped by our ethnicity. We've been shaped by our family of origin. We're shaped by our last names and our zip codes that we grew up in. We're shaped and formed by the workplaces where we spend a lot of our time. We're shaped by the digital echo chambers that we often find ourselves in. And so, like it or not, the person that you're becoming is heavily influenced by the people that you're around. And the aim of the Christian life is for who we're becoming, the person that we're being formed into, for that person to be Jesus, as Paul said in Romans 8. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his son. That is the aim of Christian formation, of discipleship to Jesus, is for us to be formed into the image of God's son. That's what we're after. And we can get down with that part. We like that part. God chose us. We're chosen. He loves us. And he wants us to become like his son. That's all good. We like that part. We just don't always like the second part of this verse that says, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Because here's the harsh reality for many people, is that you're not God's only child. I think a lot of Christians, we act as if that were the case. We wish that we were God's only child. Much like how some kids, they're fine with their parents. They can get along with their parents because the parents give them things. So like, I'm good here, but these siblings, this brother or this sister that you brought into the world is really damping my style here, okay? Our family would be so much more peaceful or so much cooler or so much more fun if it weren't for them. And a lot of times that's how we in the church can be. You know, if it'd be so great if it was just you and Jesus and not all these crazy people that he's also invited. But here's the thing, not only do you have siblings, harsh reality number one, the second thing is you need them. You don't just have them, you need them. Paul in 1 Corinthians 12, he's talking about this to the church, and he's comparing the church to the human body. And he's saying we're all members of Christ together, just like different parts of the body are members of the same body. In verses 18 through 21, he says, but our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where he wants it. How strange a body would be if it only had one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can never say to the feet, I don't need you. Yet, so often, we find ourselves, we may not be saying it expressly, but we sure live like it's true. God, I know I need you, but I'm not so sure I need them. And yet here Scripture is saying that we need one another. And it doesn't say just the extroverted people need people. Okay? Our need for community isn't an introverted thing or an extroverted thing. It's a human thing. We need one another because we weren't designed to follow Jesus in isolation. It was never the intention. See, every believer is convinced of their need for God, but according to a Barna survey, 41% of Christians view discipleship to Jesus as a completely private endeavor. So almost half of Christians view discipleship to Jesus, the way of Jesus, as a completely private endeavor. And when I hear that, I think, man, are we reading the same Bible? Because, I mean, throughout the Scriptures, it points towards God's intention in his heart for family. And the opening pages of the Bible, God creates this good world, and it's good, and it's good, and it's good. Until chapter 2 and verse 18, God says, it's not good for man to be alone. Like, right there in the introduction, because I know a lot of people fade out and check out later on, kind of like you'll do with the sermon, but right there in the introduction, God lays it out there and he says, it's not good for man to be alone. And he keeps this theme going. In the middle of the Bible, we see Ecclesiastes chapter 4 says, two people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help and tell them, I told you so. But if one person falls alone, they're in real trouble. No one's there to tell them. You know, they're in real trouble when we're alone. And this carries through to Jesus. We see in Mark chapter 3. It says, and he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him. He called them in so that they might be with him. And he sent them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. If anyone could have lived this life on their own, it would have been Jesus. I like that. But even Jesus chose to not go on a solo mission. If anyone could have, it would have been him. But even Jesus didn't go on a solo mission. He did life with people. He's the good shepherd who goes after the one lost sheep. And what does he do when he finds that lost sheep? He doesn't go, hey, you're good, do your own thing. I see that you've got green pastures. You're fine on your own. No, when he finds the lost sheep, what does he do? He brings it back into the fold. Jesus is the good shepherd who brings us back into his family. So here's what we know. By looking at this, by looking at the scope of Scripture, here's what we know. We know that God considers community to be essential. But here's what I wonder. I wonder why so many of us consider optional something that God considers essential. Community, it's an add-on. Because God, I know I need you, but them, I'm not so sure about. We face challenges when it comes to living life in community. We know that it's important, yet we still treat it as it's an add-on. It's an optional thing. So I want to look at 3 challenges to community. There's really a million reasons why it's so difficult to do this, but I want to just look at 3 today. First one we're going to look at is cultural currents. Cultural currents. We're currently living in what one writer calls the antisocial century. And he says that self-imposed solitude might be the most important social fact of the 21st century. And you hear that and you think, well, I thought solitude was a good thing. Like, didn't we just come out of a series talking about the importance of silence and solitude and being alone with God and all of that? Yes, but listen to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer says in his book, Life Together. He says, let him who cannot be alone beware of community. Let him who is not in community beware of being alone. Most of us fall into one of these 2 camps, where we will tend to constantly need to be around others, to constantly have noise and busyness going on. And then others of us will fall into the category of people who are totally fine not seeing another person for a long time, like completely being alone. And he says each by itself, and there's the key thing, by itself has profound pitfalls and perils. One who wants fellowship without solitude plunges into the void of words and feelings. And the one who seeks solitude without fellowship perishes in the abyss of vanity, self-infatuation, and despair. Man, are there 3 more accurate ways to describe what so many people in our society are experiencing? Vanity, self-infatuation, and despair. It's because we are isolating ourselves in loneliness. And solitude can be good. Time alone can be good. But the dosage really matters. Because, time away from a crying baby for a night is a good thing. As a father of 4 who, last night my in-laws graciously said, hey, let me take your kids for you so you can have a date night. Okay? That's amazing. And what did we do? This is how exciting we are. We're like, what if we just sat at home in quiet tonight? Like, how good does that sound? Because we never get it. So that's all good. The dosage matters. The problem isn't those pockets or those rhythms of solitude. The problem is when you go a decade of increasingly chronic social disconnection, where year after year you become more and more disconnected, more and more isolated. Because what happens is when people increasingly become more isolated, they become increasingly less happy, less satisfied, less who God has intended them to be. We are more connected than we've ever been before, but we're also more isolated than we've ever been. We're in what one author calls crowded isolation. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General, he published an 81-page article on what he called the epidemic of loneliness. And he said that the problems that we're seeing in people's health when it comes to the side effect of loneliness, he said it's on par with tobacco use and obesity. That's why many countries, or several countries right now, are instituting ministers of loneliness in their government because they're seeing that this is a serious issue. Young people today are less likely than previous generations to do things like get their driver's license, go out on a date, to have more than one friend, or to just spend time with friends. If you look at the charts on time spent with friends today compared to 15 years ago, it's astonishing. It's happening not just with kids, though, but also with adults, where the rituals that we had previously of togetherness are now being outsourced to the four walls of your home. So things like we work from home, we dine from home, we entertain ourselves at home, we even worship at home. And so what's happening is the entire U.S. economy is reorienting itself to ensuring that you can stay within the four walls of your house. And it's moved from just remote work to something like remote living. Okay? Here's what I'm not saying in all of that. I'm not saying that it's wrong to work from home or to get takeout or to skip the movies and watch something at the house or to join church online, because we're literally streaming church online right now. Okay? I'm not saying that those things are wrong. I think it's important for us to be aware of the cultural current that we live in. Because in Romans 12, when Paul talks about not being conformed to the ways of the world, this is how the world is going to shape us. The world is currently, the current is pulling us away from togetherness into isolation, into tribalism. Like that's the current that the world is pulling us in. And if we're not aware of it, then we're just going to be swept right along with it. First issue. The second challenge is crushing expectations. So knowingly or unknowingly, oftentimes when we step into Christian community, we bring with it a set of unrealistic expectations. Someone has been in church. I heard an amen from somebody enthusiastically. Okay. So you get it, right? We show up to a small group and we think, man, this one group right here, this group is going to single-handedly fix all of my childhood trauma, my personal dysfunction, my relational issues that I have. It's going to be just perfect. They're all going to be like licensed therapist quality friends. That's the expectation. Perfection, the ideal community. They're all going to be super cool, really normal people. Listen to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer, back to him. He said, those who love the dream of Christian community more than the Christian community itself. So we've painted this idealized, we have this romanticized idea of what community should be like. When we love the ideal more than the community itself, what happens is we become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest and earnest and sacrificial. We've romanticized it. We put these unrealistic expectations on it. We think it's going to be perfect. In reality, it's not going to be perfect. More than likely, it's going to be a group of people who are also struggling with their own sins. It's going to be people who are dealing with also trying to be honest and vulnerable in community. They're trying to figure this life thing out too. But what happens is when you put an expectation on them, you crush them with the weight of that expectation that you've put on them that they have no idea is there. You've entered into a contract judging others with an agreement that they didn't actually make with you. You're projecting onto them a role that they never signed up for, and as a result, people get hurt. And this is one of the biggest reasons why it's so difficult for people to enter into community and walk this life out in togetherness, because they've been hurt, they've been burned, they've been stabbed in the back, they've opened up with someone before only for that thing to be weaponized against them, or they trusted someone only for that person to go and air their dirty laundry with everybody else. And so we avoid community for the same reason that you avoid a fire after the second time you've put your hand in it. You know, like you've been burned, not going to do that again. And so we step back, we avoid it, we distance ourselves so that we can stay safe. The third challenge with community is the church commodity. So we've all been formed. We're formed by the area that we live, the wider culture that we're in. And for those of us who live here, we have been formed by consumer instincts that have found their way into the church. And that's not necessarily your fault, because we just live in a society that's really, really good at creating consumers. But the problem is, whenever that approach, that outlook of commodity and consumer finds its way into the church, and we start to treat the church like just one more commodity that's there to satisfy our wants, our desires, our tastes, and our preferences. The church is really there for us, so that we can get what we want, when we want it, and how we want it. It's just one more good or service that we receive. And we do this when it comes to, we do this with Jesus, when it comes to things like our salvation. Love that gift. Like that service that you offer, Jesus, I'll take that. This teaching over here, that's good too. Worship gives me good feelings. I like that. So I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm going to shop the services that Jesus offers. And hey, if there are other things that offer the same but better, like I'm open. I'm got my toes in, but I'm also keeping my options open. Why? Because we're consumers, and that's what consumers do. But let me tell you, Jesus is not your service provider. The church is not his product. It's his people. Jesus did not die a brutal death on the cross to create customers and consumers. He died a brutal death on the cross so that he could make us sons and daughters. Jesus is not some celestial CEO that's advocating for brand loyalty. He's king of the universe that's calling for us to lay down our lives, our tastes, our preferences, ourselves. He's calling us to lose our lives so that we can find our lives in him. Now listen, it's okay to have tastes and preferences and opinions. All that's good. But when we start treating Jesus and his church as the reason that they're there is for the same reason as any other commodity, which is to satisfy our desires, then we're missing it. That's why we often say that church isn't an event that you go to, it's a family you belong to. Because we're saying that to challenge and to push back against this culture that says that church is really just a collection of goods and services. No, church it's not a commodity, it's a community. It's not God's product, it's God's people. And I know that there are people in the room who you're currently in the midst of, earlier we threw out that question of, we're always looking for the answer to the question of, who are my people? And I know there are people in the room right now that you're in that process. You're looking for a community of people that with that question in mind, who are my people? And so here's our encouragement to you. We as a church, we don't own people. It can be really hard to talk about community and the importance of commitment to a community without it coming across as too heavy-handed. Like we own people and you need to commit here, and if you leave here, you're going to be excommunicated, and no one's ever, like, that's not what I'm saying. That's not who we are. That's not how we behave. Okay? But I do want to encourage you, find a place. Our heart for you is that you find a place. It doesn't have to be here. We want you to find a place that is a healthy community of believers where you can put down roots, commit, and plant so that you can grow. Because you grow where you're planted. When we treat church as a commodity, we show up and we're looking for a place that satisfies our tastes, our desires. And the minute that place, does something that we don't like, they change the color of the carpet or the music or whatever, then we uproot ourselves and we go to the next thing. Or because we're looking for the best deal. And again, that's not to say that you can't, find another church. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's something about planting somewhere, not just showing up as a consumer to get something, but showing up and putting down roots and committing and contributing. That kind of growth only happens in the context of community. And it's so important for us to see that. So despite these challenges, Jesus still says these two, we see in Scripture these two realities, that we both have siblings. So you're not God's only child. We have siblings and we need them. And so how do we find the way of Jesus in light of this? How did Jesus relate to his siblings? So just a few things that we see in the Gospels on how Jesus related with people. The first thing we see is that Jesus was with them. In the announcement of the arrival of Jesus, it's announced with Emmanuel, God with us. It's in his name. We see in Mark chapter 3, the verse that we read earlier, that he gathered people together so that they might be with him. Jesus was with people. And we see times in Jesus' life where he would often, he had these rhythms of getting alone with God, in solitude and being alone with God. But then Jesus was also accused of being a drunk and a glutton. So he wasn't alone in isolation all the time. He was around people enough for people to misunderstand him in that way. We just did a series a few months ago on how frequently Jesus found himself around a table sharing a meal with people. If you read through the Gospel of Luke, Jesus seems to always be at a meal with people. We need to learn what it means to have a meal again. I was reading a book recently where a guy disconnected from, all forms of screens, did a couple crazy things. He went and lived in a monastery for a couple weeks, and then he went and lived with some Amish families for a couple weeks. And he said one of the things that he noticed with the Amish is they had 3 meals a day, and every time the meal was about an hour long. And he said first meal, he gets there, he eats his food, and he's done eating in about 5 minutes. And he notices that they don't get up from the table, and they stay there. And he asked the guy, he said, hey, you guys have a lot of work you need to get done today. It only takes just a few minutes to eat. Why are we still here? The guy looked at him and he said, well, that's because you've only eaten. You haven't had a meal. There's something about being around a table together, slowing down, looking eye to eye, that we're missing. Just a few years ago in 2023, 74% of all restaurant traffic was off premises. So 74% of all restaurant sales were takeout. Again, that's not to say you should never get takeout. Okay, I have to overqualify all these things. What I'm saying is there's something missing when we don't find opportunities and times and make time to be around a table together, unhurried, being in the company of our brothers and sisters. So Jesus is with them. We also see that Jesus put up with them. Thank God for that. Man, Jesus puts up with a lot from you, obviously. Now, Jesus didn't have a romanticized view of community. He knew how people really are, and that's what attracted him to us. He loves real people, not ideal people. So Jesus puts up with a lot. He put up with their doubts and their immaturities. Oftentimes, the minute someone becomes an inconvenience for us, we're like, I'm out. I didn't sign up for this. But Jesus put up with them. We also see that Jesus wept with them. Jesus didn't consider himself, he didn't try to protect himself by putting up a barrier between him and people. He got close enough to them to when they wept, he wept. He got close enough to them that they could betray him or hurt him or abandon him. Jesus didn't protect himself or shelter himself from people. He got close to us. He came with us. He wept with us. The reason why he did all of this is because he loved them. The reason for all of it, he loved them. In John chapter 15, Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. See, for us, it's oftentimes the way we think is, God, I know I need you. I'm just not sure if I need them. For Jesus, it was, God, I need you and I need them. I love you and I love them. This is the way of Jesus. So how do we practice this as a church, few simple things. One of them is through our gatherings, what we're doing right now. This is us coming together because community is a shared experience. You could get the songs that we played earlier. You could download them on your playlist. You could listen to the message later online when you're doing dishes or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You could do all of that, but there's something about being together in the presence of God. There is something about the shared experience that forms us. Another way that we do this is we do it through groups, life groups. They're not the end-all, be-all to community. It's just a simple way for you to get connected with other people. We also do this through hospitality. I don't mean the greeters opening the doors. Listen, we're all part of the hospitality team. Okay, by hospitality, I mean you loving people around you, sharing a meal, showing up when they're in need. I've seen so many people in our church live this out, driving people to chemo treatments because they don't have the strength to do it. I see people showing up and providing meals in times of grief and loss. I see people showing up with prayers time and time again. The methods change. That's why method is less important than the culture. Is the culture of our church shaped by the word, written and living? Are we forgiving each other? Are we repenting to one another? Are we holding offense against one another? See, listen, you can go to all the gatherings in the world. You can go to every life group on the wall. But if you're holding on to offense, if you're not forgiving, if you're not walking this thing out, then we're missing it. Like that's the whole reason these things exist, is to form us into Christ likeness. We need to be loving one another. I love this. This is a common saying, or this was a common saying in the church in North Africa in the early 200s. They said, we don't preach great things, we live great things. See, the church at that time was spreading across the world because of the community that they had. People looked in and they saw, man, there's something different about the way they treat one another. They actually love one another. One church historian looking at that time, he said this, he said, it wasn't Christian worship that attracted outsiders. It was Christians who attracted them. The way that they lived, the way that they loved, this is what influenced the people. And when I ask people, just in wrapping this up, when I ask people who are new to our church, hey, what is it about our church? What is it about here that caused you to make the decision to plant here? The two most common responses I hear, the first one is the presence of God, which if you could choose any one thing to be the thing, I think that's a pretty good thing. So the second response that I hear most often is some form of the people here really love each other. Now, do we do that perfectly? No. Do we still mess up? Yes. Do we still fall short? Of course. But when we get it right, when we love one another well, it's a glimpse of heaven on earth. See, one day, we'll be gathered in the presence of God together. At the marriage supper of the Lamb, we'll enjoy the presence of God, but we're also going to be enjoying the company of our brothers and sisters. And in that moment, in that scene, at that table, I can just picture Jesus leaning over to someone who, despite Scripture's advice, missed out on the gift of community in this life because they were convinced of their need for God, but not of their need for one another. And I can just see in that moment, with a smile on his face and between laughs, Jesus leaning over to that person and saying, told you so. See, Jesus didn't come to just save your afterlife. He came to save your whole life. And so let's not wait until then to live out the kingdom of the life of the kingdom of the heavens in the here and now. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple. Send a text, share a meal, simply be with God's people.